The wind doesn't lie in Wyoming. It speaks before the storm arrives. It whispers through cracked barn wood and rattles loose window shutters like a warning you can't quite understand. And in the winter of 1887, that wind had been screaming for 3 straight days before a stranger walked out of it. He came from the north, on foot, no horse, no bedroll, just a worn leather coat that had seen better decades, 2 children pressed close to his sides, and eyes that looked like they'd already buried everything worth grieving. The widow saw him from her kitchen window first. A tall man, moving slow but steady through the snow like he'd made some kind of peace with dying but wasn't ready to let his kids go with him. She almost didn't open the door. Most women in her position wouldn't have. It was 1887. The frontier didn't reward kindness, punished it slow and sure, but something made her step onto that porch. Maybe it was the way the little girl was clutching the man's coat. Maybe it was the boy who kept looking up at his father like he was checking to make sure he was still there. The man stopped at the fence, didn't open the gate, just looked at her, and then he said 7 words that would change both their lives forever. "Give my kids milk. I'll fix your ranch. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Sending love your way. Drop it in the comments." We read every single one. Now, let me tell you what really happened that winter, because the story the town told, and the truth, they are not even close to the same thing. His name was Caleb Merrow. That much he offered himself. He didn't offer anything else that first night, and the widow, her name was Ruth Callahan, didn't ask. She'd learned long ago that desperate men don't arrive with comfortable histories. They arrive with whatever's left, and Caleb Merrow arrived with very little. She gave the children milk. Warm, fresh from the 2 dairy cows she'd managed to keep alive through the freeze. The girl, small, maybe 5 years old, with dark eyes too serious for her age, wrapped both hands around the tin cup and drank without stopping. The boy, older by 2 or 3 years, looked at his father first, waiting for a nod. Caleb gave it, and only then did the boy drink. That told Ruth something about the man, something quiet but important. She fed them cornbread and the last of a rabbit stew she'd been stretching for 4 days. Caleb ate slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned that the next meal was never guaranteed and you should honor the one in front of you. He didn't say much. The children said less. They sat at her table like they were guests in a church, careful, grateful, slightly afraid to move wrong. Ruth watched them from across the kitchen, one hand resting on the iron stove for warmth. She was 34 years old, though the last 2 years had pressed more than 2 years of age into her face. Her husband, Thomas Callahan, had died 14 months ago. A horse, a broken fence, a field that didn't care what kind of man you were when it decided to take you. She'd been running the ranch alone since. The Callahan spread wasn't large, 40 acres, a barn, a main house, a bunkhouse that hadn't seen a living soul in nearly a year. But in this part of Wyoming, 40 acres in winter was 40 acres of everything that could go wrong. The roof on the barn was failing. 2 fence lines on the east pasture had collapsed under ice and snowdrift. The pump near the cattle pen had frozen solid 2 weeks ago. She was hauling water by hand, twice a day, in temperatures that frosted your eyelashes before you made it 50 feet. She was surviving, but only barely. When the children fell asleep near the fire, the girl curled against her brother like a comma. Caleb finally spoke. "I'm not a danger to you," he said. His voice was low, rough, like gravel shifting at the bottom of a dry creek. "I want you to know that. Men who are a danger don't usually announce it," Ruth said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "I know how to work," he said. "Carpentry, fencing. I can shoe horses, fix pumps, patch roofs. I worked ranches from Texas to Montana before." He stopped. Let the sentence die without finishing it. Ruth didn't push. "Before," she repeated quietly, just to acknowledge she'd heard it. He nodded once. "I can't pay you wages," she said. "I want to be honest about that. Room and board for the 3 of us," he said. "That's all I'm asking." She looked at the sleeping children. The girl's hair had dried near the fire, and it spread around her head like a dark halo against the wooden floor. "Where are you coming from, Mr. Marrow?" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. "Billings," he finally said. Billings was 3 days' hard ride on horseback. On foot, in this weather, with 2 children, it was a miracle they were sitting in her kitchen at all. Ruth understood then that whatever had happened in Billings had been bad enough to make the impossible walk feel worth attempting. She didn't ask about Billings. "There's a bunkhouse," she said instead. "Cold, but there's a stove in it. Wood stacked outside. You and the children can take it." He nodded, stood, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached into his coat pocket and set something on her table. A small silver pocket watch, scratched and worn but clearly valuable. "Collateral," he said. "So you know I intend to stay as long as you need me." She looked at the watch, then at him. "That's not how trust works, Mr. Marrow." He looked at her steadily. "It is where I come from." She left the watch on the table and showed him to the bunkhouse. As she walked back through the snow alone, she felt something she hadn't felt in 14 months. Not hope exactly, something smaller. A door cracked open just a sliver in the dark. She didn't know yet what was waiting on the other side. He started before dawn. Ruth woke to the sound of hammering. She lay in bed for a moment, heart tight, thinking in the confused fog of half-sleep that Thomas was up early fixing something. Then the full cold truth of the world settled back over her, and she rose, dressed, and looked out the frost-laced window toward the barn. Caleb Marrow was already on the roof, in the dark, in the cold, pulling warped boards with a crowbar by the light of a lantern he'd found somewhere in the bunkhouse. She stood at the window a long time and watched him work. There's a particular kind of man who speaks best through his hands. Not because he lacks words, but because words have failed him enough times that he stopped trusting them. Caleb Marrow was that kind of man. Within the first hour of daylight, Ruth understood that whatever his past was, it had not robbed him of his purpose. He moved across the barn roof with a certainty that surprised her. No hesitation, just problem, solution, next problem. He'd located her lumber stack before she even made it outside, sorted it by length and condition with a single practiced eye, and already replaced 4 of the worst roof boards before she brought him coffee. He took the coffee without looking up. "How long has the east section been failing?" he asked. "Noticed it in October," she said. "Should have been done in August." There was no accusation in it, just fact. She didn't take offense. "Thomas used to do it," she said. "And Thomas died in August." He stopped working then, looked at her. A long, quiet look that said more than the sorry that most men would have fumbled out. "I'll have it sound by tomorrow night," he said. The children appeared mid-morning. The girl, Caleb called her May, came out of the bunkhouse with her brother, whose name was Daniel, trailing behind her. May walked straight to Ruth like she'd known her for years, slipped her small hand into Ruth's larger one, and looked up at her with those dark, serious eyes. Ruth felt something crack open in her chest. Not painfully, just open. She gave them chores they could manage. May followed her like a duckling, helping scatter feed for the chickens, watching wide-eyed as Ruth showed her how to check the ice on the water trough. Daniel was quieter but worked without being asked twice. He carried wood to the bunkhouse stove, stacked it correctly without being shown how, and then came to find Ruth to ask what else needed doing. By afternoon, all 3 of them, Ruth, Daniel, May, were moving around the ranch like a small, unspoken team. Caleb came down from the roof only once before dark. He found the frozen pump on his own, studied it for 10 minutes without touching it, and then asked Ruth where she kept her tools. She showed him the shed. He nodded, returned to the roof. At supper, she asked him how he'd found the pump. "Followed the sound of you hauling water," he said. She'd been hauling at dawn, before he'd even started on the roof. He'd heard it, filed it away, was already thinking about it while his hands were doing something else. That was the first time she thought, this man carries an enormous amount of quiet inside him. And she wondered what lived in all that quiet, whether it was peace or grief or something that didn't have a name yet. Daniel asked to help after supper. He was maybe 8 years old, serious-faced like his father, but with a hunger to be useful that was almost painful to witness in a child so young. Caleb looked at his son for a long moment. "You know what collateral means?" he asked the boy. Daniel shook his head. "It means you put something valuable up to show you're serious," Caleb said. "Mrs. Callahan, what's her most valuable thing right now?" Daniel thought hard. "The cows," he said at last. "Because of the milk." Caleb nodded slowly. "So tomorrow morning, first thing before I go back up on that roof, we're going to make sure those cows are warm enough to keep giving. You're going to help me insulate their stall." The boy's face lit up. Not with excitement exactly, with something more serious than that. Purpose. Ruth watched them from across the table and thought about the pocket watch still sitting where Caleb had left it. She hadn't moved it. She hadn't decided why yet. That night, after the children were asleep and Caleb had gone back to the bunkhouse, she picked it up, held it near the lamp. On the inside of the case, she saw something engraved there. "For Caleb, until the day I can leave." She set it down carefully, like it was something that might break, or something that already had. Ruth went into town on the 5th day. She needed flour, salt, and lamp oil. She also needed to file a maintenance notice at the county land office before the month ended, a bureaucratic requirement that Thomas had always handled and that Ruth had been quietly dreading since August. She left May at the ranch. The girl had attached herself to the dairy cows with a devotion that was both useful and charming, and she was far happier there than she would have been in a supply wagon. Daniel came along, sitting quietly in the back with his boots dangling over the tailgate, watching the white Wyoming landscape roll past like a boy memorizing something he might need later. The town was called Granger's Ford. 90-some people, 2 saloons, a church that also served as a schoolhouse, and a land office above the dry goods store. It sat in a flat valley between 2 hills that blocked most of the wind, which was the only reason it had survived this long. People noticed Ruth Callahan when she came to town. They'd noticed her more since Thomas died. A woman running a ranch alone attracted a particular kind of attention on the frontier, part admiration, part calculation. There were men in Granger's Ford who had looked at Ruth's 40 acres with the same expression they used when looking at abandoned things. She tied the wagon outside the dry goods store and was barely through the door before Ida Marsh, postmistress, laundress, and the town's most efficient information system, was beside her. "Ruth Callahan," Ida said warmly. "You look half frozen." "It's 20 below," Ruth said. "I am half frozen. I heard you had a man come to the ranch." Ruth stopped moving. It had been 5 days. She told no one. "Word travels," Ida said, with a smile that was mostly teeth. "A hired hand," Ruth said carefully. "No one knows him," Ida said. "Nobody in town, nobody on the valley ranches. Fletcher Gaines says he came through Sutter's Crossing and nobody there knew him either. Just appeared out of the north." Ruth placed her order with old Harold behind the counter without looking at Ida. "He's a good worker," she said. "That's what matters. In summer, maybe," Ida said. "But honey, it's February. A strange man alone in a bunkhouse on a widow's ranch in February. People talk. People talk in July too," Ruth said. "Doesn't make them right." She went to the land office. She endured the clerk's barely concealed curiosity. She loaded her supplies without hurrying and was almost to the wagon when she heard the voice behind her. "Mrs. Callahan." She turned. Warren Holt stood on the boardwalk. He was a big man, built like a barn door, with a beard going gray at the edges and eyes that had always reminded Ruth of still water. Calm on the surface, impossible to see the bottom. Warren Holt owned 300 acres south of her property. He'd come to her twice since Thomas died, once to offer help that came with conditions she'd quietly refused, and once with a formal offer to purchase her land at a price that was insulting if you knew what the land was worth. "Heard you have company," he said. "I have an employee," she said. Holt smiled slowly. "Ranch hand who appeared from nowhere in a blizzard. You don't find that concerning?" "I find frozen pipes concerning," Ruth said. "I find failing barn roofs concerning. I find men who want my land concerning. She looked at him steadily. A man who knows how to fix things? Not so much. She climbed into the wagon. Ruth. His voice dropped. Not threatening. Something closer to certain. This valley has a long memory, and a man with no history in it makes people nervous. Then they should come meet him, she said, and clicked the reins. She didn't look back, but she felt Holt's eyes following the wagon all the way to the edge of town, steady and patient, like a man who has decided the most powerful thing he can do is wait. When she got home, Caleb had fixed the pump. It was running, clear water, flowing steady into the cattle trough. She stood looking at it for a long moment. 5 weeks of hauling. 2 years of Thomas planning to get to it. 5 days and Caleb Marrow had it singing. She looked toward the barn. The roof was finished. Solid, tight, snow-bearing. Something heavy shifted inside her. Not relief exactly. More like the sound of a clock that had been wound wrong. Finally ticking right. She went inside without saying anything about Warren Holt. But she thought about him all through supper. About the look in his eyes. About the particular patience of a man who is used to getting what he decides he wants. And she wondered what Caleb Marrow's real name in Billings had cost him. It was Daniel who said it first. He was helping Ruth carry water from the newly fixed pump. A habit he'd developed that she hadn't asked him to build, but that she had come to rely on more than she would have admitted. He was quiet for most of the walk, boots crunching on frozen ground, breath making small clouds in the cold air. Then, without preamble, without looking up, he said, "We had to leave because of what happened to Mama." Ruth didn't stop walking. She didn't change her pace or her expression. Something told her that if she made this into a moment, the boy would close back up. "I see," she said quietly. "Papa didn't do it," Daniel said. "I want you to know that. He didn't do anything wrong." He said it the way children say things that adults have told them, carefully, with the feeling of carrying someone else's words in your mouth. "Okay," Ruth said. "People thought he did," Daniel continued. "And once people think something, it's like the thinking becomes the truth even when it's not." He was 8 years old. Ruth thought, what has this boy seen to speak like that? That night, she went to the bunkhouse. She knocked. She waited. Caleb opened the door, looked at her, and stepped aside without asking why she'd come. The bunkhouse was spare but organized. His few things were placed with the careful arrangement of a man who had learned not to take up more space than necessary. May was asleep on the lower bunk, wrapped in both blankets, small face peaceful. Daniel sat at the small table near the stove, reading a battered primer by lamplight. Caleb poured her coffee, set it on the table, sat across from her. She told him what Daniel had said. All of it, word for word, the way Daniel had said it. Caleb was quiet for so long that she could hear the fire crackle and May's soft breathing and the wind testing the bunkhouse walls outside. "Her name was Anna," he said at last. "My wife." He said it flat, not as an introduction, as a fact that still hurt. She got sick in November, fever that came fast and didn't move slow on its way out. 3 days. That's all it took. He wrapped both hands around his own coffee cup. "I wasn't there when she died. I was out trying to find a doctor. Rode 40 miles in a night. Came back and she was already gone." Ruth said nothing. There was nothing to say. "There was a man in Billings," Caleb continued. "Name of Roy Sutton. He'd had his eye on Anna for years. Before we married, during, after. I'd had words with him more than once." He stopped. "When Anna died, Sutton told people I'd left her there to die on purpose. Said I'd been planning to leave her, that the fever was a convenience." He said the word convenience the way you'd say something foul. "People listened," he said. "Sutton had money and a loud voice and friends in the right offices. I had a sick wife I couldn't save and a habit of keeping to myself." He looked at his hands. "When men started coming to the house at night, I knew it was over. I packed what I could carry and walked out. Into a blizzard," Ruth said. "Into the only direction that didn't have Roy Sutton in it," he said. She turned her coffee cup slowly in her hands. "Are they looking for you?" He met her eyes. honest and steady. I don't know. Is there anything following you that could come here? Another pause. I don't know that either. She respected him for not lying to make her feel better. It would have been easy to lie. What do you want? She asked. Not harshly. Genuinely. Not for the winter. What do you actually want? He was quiet for a long time. Somewhere my kids can grow up without carrying someone else's version of their father, he said. Outside, the wind pressed hard against the bunkhouse wall. The lamp flame shivered. Ruth stood, set her cup down. You fixed the pump, she said. Yes. Roof holds up in this wind? Should hold the whole winter. She nodded slowly. There's a stretch of south fence that keeps pulling loose at the third post. Thomas put it in wrong from the start. I'd be grateful if you'd look at it tomorrow. He looked at her, understanding what she was actually saying. I'll look at it first thing, he said. She walked back across the yard to the house. Above her, the sky was clear for the first time in 2 weeks, and the stars over Wyoming burned cold and brilliant and impossibly far away. She went inside, locked nothing, slept, for the first time in months all the way through to morning. He came on a Thursday, mid-morning under a sky the color of old bone. Ruth saw the rider from the kitchen window, single horse, man she didn't recognize, moving along her fence line at a pace that wasn't quite casual. Too deliberate for a traveler. Too slow for someone with urgent business. The pace of a man who is looking at things he's been paid to look at. She stepped out onto the porch before the rider reached the gate. Caleb appeared from the direction of the south pasture a moment later, as if he'd sensed something, work gloves still on, a post-hole digger resting on his shoulder. The rider stopped at the gate, smiled wide and easy. Morning, ma'am. Is this the Callahan place? It is, Ruth said. Looking for a man named Merrow, the rider said. Caleb Merrow. Heard he might be working out this way. Ruth didn't move a muscle. Caleb had stopped near the barn. He was standing still, watching the rider from 30 yards away, his posture the particular stillness of a man deciding something fast. Why are you looking for him? Ruth asked. The rider's smile didn't waver. He was good at this. Just a message to deliver. Nothing unfriendly. Got a letter from a man in Billings. Who in Billings? Ruth said. Fellow named Sutton, the rider said. Roy Sutton. Says he has something that belongs to Mr. Merrow. Wants to arrange a return. Ruth looked at the man. She looked at his horse, well-fed, winter-shod, the kind of animal that cost money. She looked at his coat, his boots, the way his right hand rested with practiced casualness near his hip. Mr. Merrow isn't here, she said. The rider tilted his head. That right. That's right, she said. I haven't seen anyone by that name. The rider looked past her, toward the barn, toward the place where Caleb was standing perfectly still. Much obliged, ma'am, he said, and he turned his horse around. He didn't leave immediately. He rode the fence line back the way he'd come, slow and deliberate, looking at the repaired sections, the cleared snow around the cattle pen, the smoke coming from the bunkhouse stove. Ruth went inside only when he was out of sight over the first hill. Caleb was at the porch steps before she reached the kitchen. He's from Sutton, he said. Not a question. He said so himself, she said. He stood in the doorway, jaw tight. I should go. Sit down, she said. Ruth, sit down. He sat. She poured coffee he didn't drink and stood across the table from him with her arms folded. If you leave, she said, that man reports back that you were here and you ran. Sutton knows which direction you came from. He probably already knows about this ranch. Running won't make you invisible. It'll just make you tired. Caleb said nothing. And your children can't walk another 3 days in the snow, she said. The bluntness of it hung between them, necessary and sharp. He looked at his hands on the table. Those hands that had rebuilt half her ranch in 2 weeks. Scarred and capable and, right now, absolutely still. What's Sutton actually want? She asked. The land, Caleb said quietly. Anna's family land. 20 acres outside Billings. Her daddy left it to her, then to me, then to the children. Sutton wants it. Has for years. He paused. The story he told about me, it wasn't just cruelty. It was strategy. Man convicted of abandoning his wife forfeits her estate. That's the law. Ruth stared at him. He manufactured a reason to take your children's inheritance, she said. Caleb nodded once. Slow. Heavy. She was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the stove ticked and breathed. How many men does Sutton have? Caleb looked up. Money men, she clarified. Legal men. The kind who file papers and contest claims. Enough, he said. He owns 2 judges in Billings. He doesn't own any judges in Calhoun County, Ruth said. Caleb studied her face. I know a man, she said. A lawyer in the county seat. He helped me with Thomas's estate when people were trying to complicate it. He's honest and he's sharp and he doesn't scare easy. She paused. And I have letters. Thomas collected documents on this valley, on land claims, on men who manipulate property law out here. He believed records mattered. He kept everything. She walked to the back room, returned with a cedar box, worn at the corners, locked with a small brass key she wore on a chain around her neck. She set it on the table between them. I don't know if there's anything in here that helps you, she said. But Thomas always said that the man who keeps records always outlasts the man who only keeps secrets. Caleb looked at the box, then at her. Why are you doing this? He said. She held his gaze. Because your boy told me you didn't do anything wrong, she said. And I believe him. The wind outside howled once, hard and long, like something trying to push through the walls. That night, the rider came back. Not alone. There were 3 of them. Ruth saw the lantern light moving through the south field at 10:30. She'd been awake, some instinct keeping sleep at bay since sundown. She went to the window, counted the moving lights, counted again. 3. She went to the bunkhouse without a coat, moving fast through the dark and cold, and knocked twice. The quick double knock she and Caleb had agreed on that afternoon without ever calling it an agreement. He was already up. She'd half expected that. 3 men, she said low and fast. South field, moving toward the barn. He was pulling his boots on. He looked at her. Get the children. Where? Root cellar under the house. Back corner. There's a second door out to the north side of the yard, hidden by the old hay pile. I found it yesterday when I was checking the foundation. He looked at May still sleeping, looked at Daniel who was sitting up, awake, watching his father with those old eyes in a young face. Daniel, Caleb said quietly, you remember what I told you. You go with Mrs. Callahan and you take care of May. No matter what you hear, you understand. Yes, sir, Daniel said. The boy took his sister's hand. May woke without crying, looked at her brother's face, understood something was happening, and simply stood up. Ruth took them to the house, got them into the cellar. Daniel carried May down the ladder without being asked. Ruth pressed the trapdoor closed above them, moved the braided rug over it, and went back to the front of the house. She took Thomas's rifle from above the mantel, loaded it, checked it, set it by the front window. She watched the dark. The 3 men came around the east side of the barn, away from where she'd expected them, which told her they'd scouted the property before dark. They knew the layout. This wasn't improvised. They were moving toward the bunkhouse. Caleb came from the opposite side, out of nowhere, from behind the cattle pen, moving silent across snow that should have announced him. He was carrying nothing in his hands that she could see, which seemed wrong until she understood that he'd positioned himself between the men and the house, between them and where his children were. The tallest of the 3 men stopped, said something she couldn't hear through the glass. Caleb answered. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the tone. Calm, level. The voice of a man who is afraid and is not going to let that fear become anything useful to the people in front of him. One of the men stepped forward. She recognized the rider from that morning. She lifted the window latch. Cold air poured in. That's my property, she called out. Her voice was steadier than she felt. And those are 3 men trespassing on it at 10:30 at night. I've got a rifle, I've got a bead on the leftmost one, and I have absolutely no obligation to ask questions first. Dead silence. She meant every word, and they heard it. This isn't your business, ma'am, the morning rider called back. You're standing 30 feet from my barn, she said. Everything here is my business. Another silence. Then, low voices between the 3 men. Not afraid exactly. Recalculating. Caleb still hadn't moved. Roy Sutton doesn't know you, the rider finally called to Caleb. But he knows what you took from Billings. Come back willing, and the children can stay wherever they are. Don't come back, and the filing goes through. You lose the land. You lose everything. And we make sure Calhoun County knows exactly what kind of man sheltered here. That last part was aimed at Ruth. She understood it precisely. This wasn't just pressure on Caleb. This was a threat to ruin her. To make Granger's Ford believe she'd harbored a dangerous man. To make Warren Holt's offer look like mercy. She thought about Warren Holt's patient eyes. She thought about Thomas's cedar box. About the lawyer in the county seat. About the letters they'd spent 3 hours reading that afternoon, letters that included correspondence between a Billings land agent and a Calhoun County speculator, discussing strategies for pressuring frontier widows into selling below value. She thought about how sometimes in the dark, the thing that looks like power over you is actually the last move a frightened man has left. You come back tomorrow, she said clearly, during daylight, with papers signed by a judge in this county. Until then, you leave my property. Right now. A long silence. The cold settled between all of them like a 5th person standing there. Then the 3 men turned and walked back through the south field, and the lantern lights shrank and disappeared over the hill. Caleb didn't move for a long moment. Then he exhaled, one long, slow breath that rose white in the winter dark. He turned and looked at her through the open window. The lamp behind her caught the side of his face. Are they gone? She asked. Yes, he said. She lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't let them shake until now. Go check the children, she said. He nodded, started toward the house. Stopped. Ruth. His voice was rough, low. I know this isn't what you agreed to when you opened that gate. She looked at him across the cold, dark yard. No, she said. But it's what's in front of us. So tomorrow we deal with it. He nodded once, and something in his face shifted. Not relief. Not quite. Something older than relief. Something that looks like a man recognizing solid ground after a long time of finding none. He went inside to his children. She stood at the window alone, in the cold, watching the empty hill where the lanterns had gone. The wind had died. The stars were impossibly bright. And somewhere in the dark, Warren Holt was sitting in his warm house, waiting to hear how this night had ended. The lawyer's name was George Aldous. He was 60 years old, had one good eye and one glass one, and had spent 35 years watching powerful men try to use legal language like a weapon against people who didn't know how to read it. He knew how to read it. When Ruth Callahan arrived at his office in the county seat with a cedar box full of letters and a man named Caleb Marrow seated quietly beside her, Aldous read for 4 hours without speaking. Then he looked up over his spectacles and said, with the calm satisfaction of a man who has been waiting for exactly this kind of document, Mr. Sutton has made several very expensive mistakes in writing. Took 3 months. 3 months of filings, counterfilings, depositions, and the particular slow machinery of justice that grinds but does, eventually, grind. Sutton's 2 Billings judges turned out to be easily frightened when the sun was shone on them directly. The land agent's correspondence with the Calhoun County speculator, who turned out to be Warren Holt's business partner, unraveled enough of the scheme that Holt quietly withdrew his standing offer on the Callahan Ranch and stopped appearing in Ruth's life with the patience of a man who expects to inherit. Anna Marrow's 20 acres outside Billings were confirmed as belonging to Caleb Marrow's children. All legal, all final. Roy Sutton did not take it quietly. But in the end, quiet men with good records always outlast loud men with bad ones. Thomas Callahan had known that. He'd spent years building proof of it. Caleb stayed through the spring. then through the summer. By the following autumn, the bunkhouse had been converted. Not back into a bunkhouse, into 2 rooms. One for Daniel, one for May. With a window each because every child deserves a window. People in Granger's Ford talked, of course. They would always talk. But Ruth Callahan had stopped caring what Granger's Ford said about her around the same time she stopped hauling water by hand, which was around the same time a man walked out of a blizzard and stood at her fence and said 7 words that changed everything. Nobody knows exactly when Ruth and Caleb stopped being widow and hired hand and became something else. There was no announcement, no ceremony, not at first. Just a gradual settling, like snow that keeps falling until the landscape you knew is covered, and what's beneath it is preserved, and what's on top of it is new and clean and bright. May grew up knowing how to check dairy cows and red weather and bake cornbread. Daniel grew up knowing how to build things that last, roofs, fences, the kind of trust that holds up in winter. And every year, on the first real freeze, Ruth would stand at the kitchen window and look toward the north. Not waiting for anything, just remembering that sometimes the hardest winters are the ones that bring you what you didn't know you needed. And sometimes a man with nothing left but his children and his word is the most honest kind of man there is. What would you have done in Ruth's place? Would you have opened the gate? Drop it in the comments. And if the story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs a reminder that even the coldest winters end.